You're listening to Alamo City Limits Podcast with Noah Magaro-George, the official San Antonio Spurs podcast of Pounding the Rock in SB Nation.
What's going on, Spurs fans? Welcome back to Alamo City Limits, the official San Antonio Spurs podcast of SB Nation and Pounding the Rock. Today, we're going to try out something new called Fan Friday. I'm going to bring a special guest on. Today, we have Mark Schindler. We're going to be talking about the silver and black, and then at the very end, maybe the last 15 minutes or so, we're going to do a Q&A/hot take sesh with Spurs fans. But like I mentioned, we have Mark Schindler of Indy Cornrows and Premium Hoops with us today. How you doing, Mark?
I'm really great, Noah. How are you doing today, man?
I'm awesome. I just finished playing tennis. I got a Sonic drink, so my day's going pretty well so far.
You know what? I've actually never been to Sonic. It's on the to-do list, but as you know, I have an unfortunate amount of hot food takes that don't tend to go my way. Currently in the midst of one. I called Cinnabon overrated, and I think it's a fair take, but yeah, that has been hell for my mentions. But no, today's a good day, man.
Awesome. And let me ask you, I know this has nothing to do with the Spurs, but is Sonic not like everywhere? Is it not like regionally?
No, it's in. So I'm in Ohio, and it's in Ohio. I just have never had the intention to go to Sonic.
Wow,
it just has never happened for me. I don't know. Like I've driven past it so many times, and I just never end up there. But I'll have to make it happen eventually.
Yeah, check it out. It's good. This isn't sponsored by Sonic or anything, but it's really good. Not the food, really. The food. Yes, yet. The food isn't good, but the drinks are super bomb. So we'll go ahead and hop into the Spurs stuff. Kai Jones, Trey Murphy, Keon Johnson, they were big names at the Combine yesterday. Kai Jones interviewed with the Spurs. Trey Murphy worked out with the Spurs. And Keon Johnson interviewed with the Spurs. So I kind of want to get your insight because you do a really good job of breaking down prospects. You watch a ton of tape. You have really insightful thoughts about these prospects, about the draft in general. What do you think about those three guys? Maybe order them in sort of a tier in case Spurs fans aren't familiar with them. And then kind of give us an idea maybe of what they bring to the table for an NBA team.
Yeah, well, the top for me would easily be Keon Johnson out of Tennessee's wing. Kind of like, I think he ended up measuring around 6'3.5", 6'4", out of shoes at the Combine. But he's somebody who got to basketball really late. I think he just started up towards the end of high school, played 1 year at Tennessee. I think a lot of people would throw out the idea, and I was talking about this on Twitter a couple days ago, a lot of people are throwing out the idea that he's just an athlete without a lot of tools and he's really raw. I don't really agree with that. He's probably might be the best at-rim finisher in the class right now. Part of that is the amazing vertical. Like you just talked about at the Combine, his numbers are insane. I think he had a 48.5-inch running vertical and a 41-inch standing vert, which is just like those two together are crazy. Like I try not to take too much away from Combine numbers. It's more like, are they going to meet the criteria of what I saw from them throughout the year? And Keon definitely did. He's one of the few guys who I expected something like that from. His handle's like surprisingly functional considering he's only played organized basketball for like 3 years. The jumper is definitely a work in progress, but I think we've just gotten far enough in our time in the NBA that we know guys who come in with jumpers that need work are going to be capable jump shooters in time. So I'm pretty confident that'll happen with Keon. He doesn't do anything like damning or frustrating with his shot. Like I think it's going to be fine. And he's already he's one of the best perimeter defenders in the class. He's got really good awareness, really good feel for the game, especially on the defensive end. A lot of it's just going to be what does he become with the ball in his hands? And even then, even if he's not somebody who's crazy impactful as an on-ball player, I think he's going to have a long time in the league as somebody who can attack second side actions or he's going to factor in lob plays, be athletic, factor in the transition, and be a positive defender. So I'm really high on Keon. I think he's going to be worth a top 10 pick for sure. And based on how everything's going, he's slipped a little bit, but I'm pretty sure that he's going to end up being top 10.
Yeah, I kind of agree with your assessment there, especially like with him going top 10. I don't think he's really a realistic prospect for the Spurs, but I also think if he's there, and you can give me your opinion on this, but if he's there, I don't think San Antonio's sort of glutton of guards should keep them from drafting someone like Keon, because I think, at least from my perspective, and I haven't watched as much Keon as you have probably, but just from looking at him, I feel like he has a higher ceiling than most of the other players who are already on San Antonio's roster. And when I look at someone like Devin Vassell, I like him a lot. And I've been a big Devin Vassell guy since he got to San Antonio, but he's not someone who projects to be like a high usage guy. And Lonnie Walker, I like a lot as well, but he's still got a really shaky handle. he's super inconsistent. And granted, he hasn't really, like, basically, if you want to count net last year as, his rookie season, I suppose you could, because the first 2 years he was in the G League or he was hardly playing at all. But even so, I kind of feel like you can't pass up on Keon just because you have, Lonnie or Derek or every other guard on this team.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think I'm still really high on Lonnie Walker. I'm just not sure it's going to happen in San Antonio, given, I think DeJounte clearly – DeJounte and Derek both are ahead of him in the pecking order for usage, and understandably so. So, I just don't know if he's going to get the opportunity to really rep out where he's at with his handle. It improved this last year, but it's still a lot of it's just decision making and everything on top of that too. With Keon, though, you're totally right. I think the idea that they shouldn't take Keon if he's there just because he might be, in a position the way that I always look at it. I think we get really caught up in talking about drafting for fit or drafting the best player available when really it's always just about what is the combination of the two that you're most comfortable with. So who is the best player available at your selection that your organization is going to be able to develop at the highest level? I think that's how I always try and look at it. The Pacers a couple of years ago took Goga Bitadze, who I think was the best player available at the time. But also you have to look at it too. Okay, you have two guys who already struggle to share the court together at the 5 spot, and you're forcing one of them to play the 4. And you're drafting a guy who now hasn't even gotten 1,000 minutes in his first 2 years. And that's a little frustrating. I think you have to find avenues to really develop guys. And if you're not doing that at a high level, then, it's a little bit of a poor reflection on your player development and organization, in my opinion. So I would agree. I think if Keon is there at 12, then the Spurs have to take him.
And I don't think he will be there, but one guy who really intrigues me is Kai Jones. And I think for me, he has such a wide range of possible outcomes. I think he's another guy who he didn't even pick up basketball until he was 16 or 17. So it's not like he's been playing that long. So it's pretty encouraging seeing his growth curve from, year 1 at Texas to year 2 at Texas. But some people may be misled by watching strictly highlights, thinking this guy's going to come in right away and be this big, impactful player for a franchise. He came off the bench at Texas. And I don't think a lot of, maybe casual fans who followed Texas very casually realize that. So I like him a lot. I think he's got quite a bit of upside, but I also think he's somebody who could end up flopping out of the league if things don't go the right way. What do you think of Kai Jones? And would you think he's a prospect that San Antonio should seriously take a look at 12, or is there other people who you like better?
I personally, I don't know if I'm there with Kai at 12. I think he's a first round pick for sure. Like you mentioned, the highs are really high, but also they don't happen super often like you'd want. And also the lows are pretty apparent. I think with him right now, just to be positive, the mobility is ridiculous at his size. He's not quite Evan Mobley, but in terms of being 6'11" and moving like a wing, pretty fantastic. But he has a lot to work on in terms of his balance and body control. And a lot of that will come by getting stronger. Right now, I think he's 6'11", 215 or 220. And it shows. He can really get bodied playing against guys who are sturdier. And again, that's not huge. Rim protection, of course, is really important. But it's more so about protecting the rim and less about defending post-ups or anything like that. But it's more okay, well, he has the ability, one of the intrigues for him is can he take guys off the dribble? And you can see that sometimes in games, but there are moments where, well, not just moments, a lot of moments where he'll catch the ball in the corner or off a cut coming from the weak side. And, he'll put the ball on the floor once or twice, but then he loses his handle because he's just out of, he bends the wrong way, or he's almost too flexible at points, if that makes sense. His body's not really completely caught up with what he's trying to do with his handle. And that shows through a lot. And I think that's going to take a while for him to work on and get through. So I think I look at him almost he's kind of I like him probably better as a prospect than Jackson Hayes. But he's not even then, we've seen how long it's taken for Jackson Hayes. Not even that long, but it took him really a year and a half to start to find a real footing in the rotation in New Orleans. And I think it could take Kai even longer than that, just because his flashes have maybe been even better than what Jackson's were at Texas. I think his floor is a lot lower than where Jackson's at coming out of Texas as well. So I think it's a lot of what does that look like. And I also think too, people would probably be like, well, we need to have a guy who can come in and contribute early on. And what does that look like next to Jakob? And I kind of like it personally, just for me. Like, I don't think Drew Eubanks is a full-time backup in the NBA. I think he's more of a third big. Like, I don't have anything against him. I think he was good for stretches, but I think you really saw down the stretch of the season that he couldn't really hold on to the 5 spot on his own. I like the idea of bringing in Kai and having him grow behind Jakob, and eventually maybe there's a chance where they could start together, or even, you don't have to, like, that's something you figure out moving on. But I do think it's worth looking at 12, but I would probably have a couple guys over him right now.
Yeah, and I agree with you there, especially with and I love Drew Eubanks. I think he was fantastic in stretches. He did as much as he could with, where he is right now, but I don't think Drew Eubanks is preferably your second string big, right? He's not the second string guy, and he's more of that depth guy. And I think the reason San Antonio brought him in for a multi-year contract is he's been around the organization for a long time. He's been through the Austin Spurs system. He understands what they want, what they want from him. So I think they value that. But when it comes to Kai, I think if you're looking at Kai or Drew, I'd rather have Kai long term. Now we'll move on to the last guy who I wanted to talk about with you here is Trey Murphy. So Trey Murphy is actually someone I didn't get much of a chance to watch at Virginia. I know that he came from Rice University as a transfer, but it looks like his shooting splits are pretty solid. He's got good length. His athleticism looks pretty solid. But can you tell me a little bit more about him as a player, and what is his range? Like, where do you expect him to fall in this class?
So he's somebody who started to rise recently, as more people have gotten around to watching him. I wouldn't have him as high as Kai Jones. I think I have him. I actually forgot to rank him on my big board because I didn't get around to watching him until the last couple of days. I've watched his first few games from him. His shot is ridiculously good. Like, just speaking on his shooting splits, this last year was 50-40-90 in college, which it doesn't sound like a lot because it's just college or whatever. But at the same time, it's pretty pertinent. He's really shot up because when he was at Rice, he was a guard. I think he was like 6'3" when he got to Rice. Ended up transferring to Virginia because he had a massive growth spurt, and he's a legit 6'9" now. So you can see on court, he's still kind of growing into his body a little bit and feeling that out. He's pretty wiry, needs to add strength, but the shot is legit. I have questions about whether or not he's going to be a movement shooter. Like, I need to watch more on that to be completely sure. But right now, he's a lights out shooter from NBA distance. From 3, which I think, that tracks looking at just free throw form and his shot form in general. He's great at getting into his shot, organizing himself before the shot too, which is really important. So I'm confident in that. I have questions about being able to take guys off the dribble though. Like, shooting is great, but if you can't attack a closeout consistently and make decisions out of there, then I just don't know that I want to spend a first-round pick on you. Like, he's a guy who I think will probably have a first-round pick used on him. But I think that's where my questions are for him. He's a bouncy athlete. He can finish at the rim, finished really well at the rim this past year. Part of that's because he's not being asked to self-create at all. But that's more about his handle. Like, he's not at a place where you're going to ask him to create for himself. And I think he's, like, capable of making fine passes when he has the opportunities to, but it's more so about, the handle's the clear swing skill for him. Is he going to be able to develop it enough to attack closeouts, or maybe develops it even more to where he can self-create for himself a little bit? But right now, I'd say he's like pretty strictly a 3-and-D prospect coming in, and it's just going to depend on what happens with the handle.
Okay. And so I think I got a good understanding kind of what he brings to the table. I'll read you 5 more names, and you don't have to give like an in-depth like breakdown of any of these guys. Just give me an idea of who you like the best out of these. So Austin Reeves, Maceo Teague, LJ Figueroa, Jordan Hall, Joe Wieskamp, and then Yves Pons. Which of those guys do you like potentially in the second round for the Spurs? I know that they were one of the worst three-point shooting teams in the NBA last season. Personally, I like Joe Wieskamp. He had a fantastic game at the Combine. I think earlier today. Is he someone who is at the top of that list of names, or is there somebody else who I read in that group who you like better than him potentially at 41?
Yeah, it would probably be for me. I'd probably have Austin Reeves number 1, actually. I've started to watch more of him recently, and he can do a lot with the ball in his hands. He can run some pick and roll, smart decision maker, definitely a better defender than Joe Wieskamp right now. And he's a confident shooter, which I really like. I just like guys who come in with some on-ball equity. Even if that's not their role in the NBA, it's good to have that in your bag. Joe Wieskamp really didn't show that at all. I do like Wieskamp a lot, though. I think I want to see him quicken his release, because I think that's going to be big for him. Right now, I mean, he's pretty strictly a shooter, but he can do a lot off movement too, which is intriguing. He's got a long wingspan. He's not a good defender right now, but I think he's somebody who can become a fine team defender with time, because he has, he's big and he has a wingspan. Like that should be enough to become a good defender if you have the positioning ability and you can just think the game. But again, I think a lot of people are copying him to Duncan Robinson, and it's so different because Duncan gets his shot off in half the time, and that makes a big difference. Like, if he can't get his shot off quicker, it's going to be hard for him to attack closeouts. It's just going to be, he's not going to command the same kind of respect of the defense, but he's a guy who he's worth taking in the second round to me, because I think there's a lot of upside there with him, especially for a team like the Spurs that needs shooting. Like, I would be very interested in taking Joe Wieskamp.
And I think one of the reasons I like Joe Wieskamp is because there's a certain section of Spurs fans or faction of Spurs fans who are like, you got to go after Corey Kispert at 12. And I think that would be a mistake. And maybe you don't agree with me, but I think if you can maybe find someone who's comparable, I'm not saying Joe Wieskamp is the shooter that Corey Kispert is, but find someone who brings a similar skill set at a lower pick. I think that would be more valuable taking Wieskamp at 41 than Kispert at 12 for a team like San Antonio. And I'd love to know your opinion on this, but San Antonio doesn't have someone who can maximize Corey Kispert's skill set. Like, I don't really think that they have that many great on-ball playmakers, and I just don't really know that having Corey Kispert at 12 is what's going to set this roster up for success long-term.
Yeah, you make such great points, man. I feel similarly. Like, part of me is I'm not a big Corey Kispert guy, which is probably part of it. Like, I've gotten to a point now where I think shooting is relatively overrated in the NBA. I'd so much rather take a shot on somebody who has ball skills, can get to the rim, and you figure out the shot later. Like, I'd rather take somebody like DeJounte Murray, because I know his shot was a work in progress, and it still is, but even with the numbers going down this year, he just got more confident with it. He took it a lot more. Like, I'd rather spend 4 years trying to build up somebody's shot than take a first-round pick on somebody who I'm not really too confident is going to be able to attack off the bounce that often. You have to use this on somebody who can give you on-ball creation, or at least the shot at somebody who can give you on-ball creation. I think to do anything, unless, like, if Corey was somebody who, like, you look at having more of an upside, then I'd think differently. But I don't. So I would definitely rather take somebody with more creation upside with that pick.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And I want to transition back towards more first-round / lottery prospects. You wrote an excellent article about James Bouknight. I recommend everybody who is in this room, when they're done with this room, check it out. It's great. Now, I want you to give sort of like a small breakdown on James Bouknight, if you will, and if he really makes any sense for the Spurs, given I don't really think he's that on-ball creator, but I do, like you wrote, he's excellent at moving without the ball. Is that something that's valuable enough to the Spurs at 12 that you go ahead and take him if he's on the board?
Yeah, that's a great question. Part of me thinks he's not going to be there at 12 or 13, because a lot's been coming out about him potentially going top 10. I'm not sure how that'll end up working out, but he's really risen up boards over the last month or so. I look at him in terms of somebody who could early on get real reps, doing stuff without the ball in his hands and trying to figure out a role from there, and then hopefully taking some more on-ball reps and develop a creation upside with bench units. So I would love him. I mean, just if you're a top 13 team, picking in the first round, I think it's worth taking a shot on James Bouknight and seeing how things translate and work out. Even if it doesn't look perfect coming out or with the Spurs, I think it'd be worth taking a shot on him.
Yeah, and speaking of things that may not look perfect with the Spurs or may not work out, Ben Simmons has kind of been like the hot button topic in San Antonio for a little bit this week.
I saw. Spurs Twitter was very up in arms about it.
Yeah, it's been very polarizing, right? It's been a polarizing topic. But with Ben Simmons, I'm looking at it. One, I don't think the fit is great in San Antonio. Like, we mentioned it earlier, but they finished 30th in three-point attempts, 30th in three-point makes, and they finished 25th in three-point percentage, last in three-point rate. I just don't know that adding Ben Simmons to a team like this makes a lot of sense. And maybe you can try to build around him, but what would it even take to get him, and is it worth it in your opinion?
So we definitely diverge there, because I think if you had an opportunity to go get Ben Simmons, you have team, unless it's, of course, I mean, unless they're asking for a crazy ransom price. I think you have to go get Ben Simmons if he's available. He will be the best player on the team automatically.
Yeah, I agree.
Your best shot at finding somebody who you can develop around. And it's not even about building around him. It's more just this team needs talent. It's not that they're not talented, but they need top-end talent. And I think Ben would clearly be that guy. I know that it doesn't fit perfectly with, the team obviously struggles with shooting right now, but I think that's something you just figure out after he gets there. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But I think regardless, you have to make that trade happen. I don't know who gets sent. I mean, I would have said Derek White last year, but given how everything has worked out injury-wise for him, I'm not sure what his trade value is. Like, I don't think it's like totally tanked or anything, but it's been really rough to see him struggle with injuries for the last 2 years, especially considering how much he's improved even just this past year. I don't think DeJounte Murray would be the guy that you send back or that Philly would ask back for, considering that, I mean, he doesn't present the same issues of Ben Simmons. That would be the wrong way to put it. Like, I trust DeJounte to attack a closeout or just to take a shot, get into the mid-range, and get into the paint. I mean, you're probably sending back like Devin Vassell, and I'd imagine draft capital too. I'd have to look at more so like I'd have to pull up Trade NBA or something to pull it out, but you're definitely sending back a pretty hefty amount to get Ben Simmons.
Yeah, and I asked you the question, is it worth it? Not because I don't think it's worth it, but there are a lot of fans who think it's absolutely not worth it. They look at this player who had, I guess you could say he had a pretty poor series, and he had an awful last couple of games closing in the series, right? But I don't think that like a series is representative of a player at whole all the time.
Yeah.
And I'll use this example like with David Robinson when they faced, and I think it was 95, they played the Rockets, and Hakeem Olajuwon dominated MVP David Robinson. And David Robinson didn't put up great numbers in that series, so are we just going to say that David Robinson's a terrible player because he had a bad series against a really, really good team that ended up winning the championship that year? Like, to me, I'm not saying that whoever beat the Sixers is going to win the championship. That's not what I'm saying, but I don't think you can look at Ben Simmons and go, oh, he's trash, I don't want him. Because I absolutely agree with you that he would be the best player on this team by far. Like, even if in some world where you acquired him without giving anyone up on the team, he would still be the best player on this team. So I guess when I say like who's gone, like who could you trade for him? I don't know if this sounds like a viable option. Personally, I don't really think it is, but it's one that I've seen kind of thrown out there across Twitter. A sign and trade for DeMar DeRozan. What sort of problems do you feel like that would pose for Philly? And I'm not really sure that they'd be interested. Do you think they would be interested in something like that, like DeMar with draft capital?
It would probably have to be more than draft capital, honestly. Just because I don't think DeMar answers all the problems for them. I actually think you and I have talked about this too. I think people really underrate how good of a player DeMar is and what it's going to look like after he leaves San Antonio. I know it's fun to bring up on-offs. I'd also point out how annoying those are and also how finicky they are and really don't paint the whole picture. DeMar was clearly the best player in San Antonio this year, even taking into account his defense. He would be the best playmaker on San Antonio by a mile, without question. Like, I think the thing with him is I trust that DeMar is going to take shots. Like, he's going to take shots. He's going to get to his spots. And more importantly, he's going to get to the rim too. Like, and that opens up so much for the offense. So I think that would do something for, especially considering that Embiid can credibly space. Like, I think that does a lot for Philadelphia, but I also think like there would be questions about like their defense would certainly fall off a little bit without Simmons. Like, I don't think that they go from the best defense in the NBA to like average. Like, I think they'd still be like a top 8 or something defense, but it's a big hit still to lose somebody that good. But I do think that they would want more back, especially considering DeMar's age. That always factors in.
Yeah, and I wrote a big piece on DeMar probably like a month back talking about why I don't think it makes sense to bring him back to the Spurs team. I don't think he really makes sense for their timeline.
I'm in agreement with you.
And obviously it's not because he isn't a good player. So I hope like everybody who read that, like if you read it, you know that I don't think DeMar is a bad player. I think he was easily the best player on this team this season, but he doesn't make a lot of sense for this team. And I also think using him as like the engine of the offense with how San Antonio is constructed wasn't really conducive to like a winning environment. Like that team was never going to be better than maybe the 7th maybe 8th seed in my opinion. Even without all the injuries and the COVID situation where there was 40 games in 68 days, I still feel confident saying like that's a 7th seed team. They just didn't have the talent. So one of the last things I want to talk about with you before we kind of move into the Fan Friday part of everything is the USA basketball team. So another thing that Spurs fans have kind of been interested about is, okay, Pop is having the chance to coach what is now the 12-man roster of Kevin Durant, Damian Lillard, Bradley Beal, Jason Tatum, Booker, Levine, Kevin Love, Adebayo, Green, Holiday, Middleton, and Jeremy Grant. And
one of those is not like the other. We'll just leave it at that. But yeah.
Yes. And so like people are saying, well, this is a great recruiting tool for Pop. But I think one of the things I would argue, and maybe you don't agree with me here, but they want to play for Pop, and this is a perfect chance to play for Pop without coming to San Antonio, right? This is a great opportunity for them to play for him, get some insight, really get some experience with him and play with their buddies. But I don't really think this is a great like recruiting tool that, one of these 12 players is going to come to San Antonio and, when they become disgruntled somewhere. Not that they will, but you know what I mean? So do you think that it even really matters that he's the head coach? Does that benefit San Antonio in any way? I'd love to get your sort of insight on that.
No, I don't. I mean, I don't think it really does anything. Like I love Pop. I think he's a great head coach, obviously, but I think it's more about like, okay, let's say if DeMar was 27 or something and he just re-upped and he's on the Olympic team and then he's going in, like I'm trying to remember who DeMar is really good friends with. Like let's say Kyle's there, Kyle Lowry, and he's like, Kyle, dude, you got to come to San Antonio. I know S is in this room, sorry, bud. But like, let's say that's the thing. Like, I mean, that's something where I could look at and be like, okay, that's all right. Maybe that's considered a recruiting tool. Again, like we're not there. I don't know everything that's going to be going on, but I don't think anybody's going to look at it and be like, oh, I want to go play for Pop. Like, I just don't really think there are a lot of people who are going to look at things and be like, yeah, I want to go to San Antonio just to play for Greg Popovich.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the last thing I want to talk to you about Team USA is it's a pretty stacked roster, and I'm looking at it thinking like, who would be the starting 5 on this team? I'll go ahead and give you my sort of like opinion. And like, I don't think that there's necessarily any wrong answers here, but I think you're definitely starting Lillard and Durant. I think there's an argument to be made that you should start Tatum as well. And I like Adebayo, and I also like having Beal in there. I don't know if you would go with a different starting 5, but I think that's a really solid starting 5 for Team USA.
So I'm really interested to see what happens with it because I mean, like in terms of pure talent, I think I would go with probably a similar starting lineup, but I also would look at it too, like what teams are they playing? So like imagine
of course.
Like dude, playing Lithuania for this team is going to be tough because Sabonis and Valanciunas are going to be starting at the same time. Like I look at that, like I think it's going to be matchup dependent for sure. But I'd agree, like, yeah, Dame, KD are obvious locks. I do wonder if Beal would start. Maybe Levine starts. I don't know. The only thing I would say about this team is they're kind of bereft of playmaking. Like, I mean, of course, it's easy, like top-end playmaking, I should say. They have good playmakers, but they don't have, Dame's probably the best playmaker on the team, and even then, he's not, like, otherworldly or anything as a playmaker. But I would agree. I'd imagine, actually, probably Draymond starts alongside Bam or something. We'll see what it looks like. They actually no, because you have to stagger it because they're the only real 2 centers on the roster. And Kevin Love, I guess, will play.
Yeah, I thought that was a sort of a weird addition. But
it was a very weird addition. I don't understand it at all. I don't really think that he should be on the team, but that's they didn't ask me. I don't. That's just being blunt. Like there are probably 20 other guys who I would take over Kevin Love on Team USA right now. But again, they didn't. Neither here nor there. I actually could see them starting Drew Holiday though, just to have more of a traditional backcourt and try and stagger things a little bit more. But yeah, I'm excited to watch Team USA. But I'm not even Canadian. I'm more excited to watch Team Canada. This is like the best Team Canada that I've had to witness in my lifetime. So I'm really excited to watch that group. I mean, yeah, Lou Dort, RJ Barrett, Andrew Wiggins, Dylan Brooks, Brandon Clark. It's not nobodies. Like that's a pretty good team. Like considering how many you're taking, I think it's a pretty solid group. I'm interested to see how America plays though, because they have to play a lot better after. Was it FIBA a couple years ago?
FIBA, yeah, 2019 they got 7th
that was
place.
Disappointing.
Yeah, it was bad. So, it was Derek White was on that team. Unfortunately, man, it didn't look great. But it is what it is. We'll sort of move in now to the Fan Friday. So I'll also tell fans. So you can pose a question to me, to Mark, to both of us, or you can give your sort of Spurs hot take. So go ahead and hit the request button to come up on the stage after you give your question. We'll take you down, but if you have a take, we can kind of talk back a little bit, back and forth a little bit, and then we'll send you back. And we'll probably do about maybe 4 or 5 of these. So if you want to give your take or if you have a question for us, go ahead and hit that request, and I'll bring you on up.
Hi, guys. How are you doing?
Good, man. How are you
doing? Question about free agency. There has been rumors about Kelly Oubre Jr., and there hasn't been anything about other players. We have a lot of money left in our cap space. I want to know what players should we go after? Should we go after players who can knock down threes, or who can be good playmaker, or who can be good rebounder? What do you guys think who we should go after?
Yeah, I mean, I think Mark, you can answer if you want, but I think at least for San Antonio, there's a lot of holes on the roster, whether that be shooting, whether that be depth in the front court, whether that be playmaking. So specifically with Kelly Oubre Jr., I don't really know how much sense that makes for the San Antonio Spurs. I know that there was a sort of report that the youngsters were interested in playing alongside him. It was on a website that I'm not really familiar with, so I don't know how much I buy into the report. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know about Kelly Oubre. What about you, Mark? Do you like Kelly Oubre for this roster?
Yeah, I think Kelly Oubre gets a little too much crap. Like, he's a good player. He's not somebody who I think is going to develop into an all-star or anything like that. I know his efficiency needs some work in some regards, but after that really rough shooting stretch for him last year, to start the year, he really figured things out and was looking a lot better down the stretch of the year before the season was over. I mean, I like him. He's a solid defender. His off-ball could use some work, but I think a lot of it, too, would just being around Greg Popovich would be fantastic for his defense. I just like the idea of adding, versatile forwards are good. The problem is he's not great as a ball mover. The ball can kind of stick with him a little bit, and that's something that I think would take a lot of time for him to figure out and work on. But I also think if you're getting him for, let's say it's just a little bit over the MLE, like 13 or 14, the deal that Marcus Morris got offered and rescinded, that's something I'd offer Kelly Oubre. Like if you're doing like 2 for 30 or something for Kelly Oubre, or 3 for 42 or something like that, like I'd willingly do that. I think this team definitely needs forward depth. I think that was a problem for them this year. He's not an amazing 3-point shooter, but he's somebody who will at least take threes and can hit them at a credible rate, play defense. Like, I think it would be a fine signing. Like, ideally, the team, I would rather see them go after somebody like Doug McDermott, to be completely honest, because I think I'd rather see guys you want Keldon Johnson to get more on-ball looks. You want DeJounte Murray to keep getting on-ball looks. Same with Derek White. Get Devin Vassell some opportunities there, and bringing in guys like Doug, who could play well off of those guys, while also just using his gravity to get more open looks for them, I think would be huge. But I'm definitely not against Kelly Oubre, but especially movement shooting would be huge for me.
Yeah, I agree with you there. We've got Jesse with us. Jesse, do you have a take?
Yeah, I actually have a question. Good to see you on here again, Noah. As far as Becky Hammon goes, I know she's getting interviewed and stuff like that. And how long do you think Pop is going to stay? And do you think you're going to be able to hold on to her to take over? And if not, then what are some strategies as far as your coaching situation there in San Antonio?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first off, I honestly wouldn't be able to tell you exactly how long he'll stay. Now, I know next season will be the last season of his 3-year extension he signed a few years ago. So I don't know if he hangs around past then, right? Because he's already the oldest coach to ever coach in the NBA. So I think he's probably done after that. But if Becky's gone, I don't know. I mean, they have Will Hardy on the bench. They have Mitch Johnson. Maybe they look at Brett Brown, or even if Mike Budenholzer loses his job, maybe they reach out to Mike Budenholzer. But other than that, I don't know. I think a lot of fans, and myself included, would love to see Becky sort of be the successor for Pop, because, again, she's coached this team for, I think it's 7 years on the bench now. She won a 2015 Summer League title with them. The guys have been here with her for a really long time, from DeJounte and Derek and Lonnie. All these guys have been with her. They respect her. And I think it would be great, not just for making history in sports, but I think it would be really good for the organization having someone who's familiar with their values, the systems that they run, and who was directly under Pop. So that's my take on it. Now, Mark, I don't know if you have a different take than I do.
I mean, I think just my read on Pop is if there's another run in this team, I think that he'll give it a year or two. But if they don't really flash anything that ends up being, meaningful towards the playoffs, and again, I think you could be like, well, what does it mean for them to do? Like, what do you want to see from the Spurs this year? Like that changes up the entire trajectory. But I do think too, given how this organization has treated things, they always want to try and keep winning. As long as Pop is around. But I also just don't know what that looks like this year, especially if DeMar leaves. I don't know. It feels like this could definitely be Pop's last year. I don't have a ton of great insight on that. But with Becky, with how everything's felt, it just feels to me, and again, this is me coming from an outside perspective. I don't have anything reported on this, of course, but it just feels to me like Becky's going to take over when Pop leaves. I know she's been looking around and doing well in her interviews. But, I mean, with how long she's been around the Spurs organization now, it just feels like the job is going to be hers for the taking when Pop retires. And it's felt like he's kind of cultivated her for that job. And especially, too, there's nothing bad on her. Of course, we're not going to see any of that as it comes out. But a lot of it is just, you can really tell the guys respect her and how they talk about her. And the biggest thing to me is, too, they don't talk about her like anything different. They talk about her just like any other coach, which has been really important to me in looking at the way that the Spurs have handled everything. But I'm not sure. Again, I mean, given how the NBA moves, we could have a completely different thought process in about a month from now.
Yeah, and I agree with you there. And one thing that I would like to throw in here, maybe it doesn't matter at all, but she was also part of, the San Antonio Silver Stars. She's been in San Antonio since 2007. And there's 14 years of her life have been committed to this city. They have murals of her up in San Antonio. The guys speak well about her. The coaching staff speaks well about her. The city has really embraced her. So it really does feel like she will probably be the successor for Pop. But you can't guarantee anything. One of the last things I did want to get out of you, Mark, though, is the direction of this team. I asked Ricky O'Donnell last week. I asked, pretty much anybody who I respect their opinion, what direction should this team be heading into? Because like you said, if they have Pop, they're going to try to win. They just are. There's not going to be a season where they're going to ever tank or, maybe lose organically, whatever you want to call it. That's just probably not going to happen. But what direction should they be looking to go into with who they have on this roster?
I mean, I think right now it's kind of a feeling out process. I want to see what this team is capable of doing without DeMar, because I do think, as much as I love DeMar DeRozan, I feel like based on everything I've seen reported, seen anything DeMar says, he loves being in San Antonio, especially considering how everything went for him leaving Toronto in a way that he didn't want to. It just has been a really good spot for him in San Antonio. I wish that people outside of San Antonio, and even in San Antonio, no offense to anybody in the room, I wish people would respect what he's done for San Antonio. I know you can look at it. I think it's more so on the organization that, I would not have personally gone in the direction that they did, trying to keep being a six seed after having to trade Kawhi. I don't think that was great for the organization. I don't think it was necessarily bad for them, but I do think you could point out, okay, well, maybe we could have been getting more high leverage reps, and also just getting more looks, getting better draft picks to get this organization into its next direction. But I also think you have to really commend what DeMar did, what LaMarcus did when they were there together. I know it didn't result in any crazy playoff runs, but I still think there was something real to what that team did in the regular season and was able to do getting into the postseason. But that being said, you have to look at it, all right, can DeJounte Murray be your lead ball handler? I think it's the real question you have in this. He's never been tasked with being that. Even last year, DeMar is the lead ball handler on that team. I don't think he's ever really had the opportunity to just be your quote-unquote 1A guy handling the ball. I am not sure if there's a playmaking jump in him, but we're not going to know until we see it. I think you have to ask the same thing, too. Can Derek White have a bigger usage? Can Lonnie Walker step in the starting lineup and stay in the starting lineup? What does it look like with Devin Vassell in the starting lineup in year 2? Are you getting anything out of Lukas Šamanić? There were real flashes. I like Luka. I like Luka's potential. There are real flashes. But again, it's all right, well, what are we getting out of this group? You have to figure out what you have in all these young players, because there are a lot of young players I really like on this team. So I think this year is more. You're going to find out what the direction is this year by the trade deadline, in my opinion.
I agree. I agree with you there, and it'll be interesting because I think a lot of people in San Antonio are ready to see DeMar move on. I'm in the same boat, but again not because I think he's a bad player, but I do think it'll be interesting to see if Derek, if DeJounte, if Lonnie and Keldon, all those guys, what they can do once he's gone. Because I think you're right. Like, we're not going to know what they can do really until they have that responsibility. Now, do I have the confidence that they're going to be able to make those large strides that are necessary? Not really. I really sincerely hope that they prove me wrong, but I just don't see it. I don't really see it in them. And that's okay. I think, that's okay if they don't make those strides, but it could be a really rude awakening for Spurs fans next year once DeMar is gone. They could really have a rough season without that guy who, he led them in points per game. He was up there in rebounds per game. He was obviously their best playmaker by a long shot. And even if you lose DeMar, you're not getting better as a 3-point shooting team. You're not getting necessarily, you may get a little bit better as a defensive team, but I just don't think you're going to be that much better without him. I think there's a real potential to be a lot worse without DeMar DeRozan, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. If they end up getting, a top pick, maybe they can figure out, are these guys capable of leading a team, or are they more sort of ancillary pieces that might make sense next to a real, genuine talent who is going to lead your team somewhere, like a Luka or a Zion or a Jason Tatum, something like that. I think that's really, at the end of the day, what's most important for this team is finding a guy who can be that franchise cornerstone.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, man. And that's why, I think a lot of people would be out on Ben Simmons as a franchise cornerstone, but regardless, top end talent, figuring out if you have it, and if you don't, figuring out ways to get it. So we're definitely in the same boat there, man.
Well, I think it's going to be about do this for the room today. I do appreciate you joining me, Mark. Why don't you let everybody know where they can follow you and where they can find your work?
Yeah, I really appreciate you having me on, man. I always enjoy getting to talk. You can find me on Twitter at mschindlernba. All my work goes up there. I always have it posted. You can find, if you want to look for websites, you can find me on premiumhoops.org and also over at Indy Cornrows. It's I'm always around. I'm pretty active online, so yeah, you can find me there. Thanks a ton for having me on, man. I appreciate this.
Yeah, definitely. I really appreciate you joining me, and everybody who's in the room, all my Spurs fans who are going to be listening to this later, definitely check out what Mark's doing. He's an awesome writer. He's a great basketball mind. And thanks to everybody who tuned in to this edition of Alamo City Limits. And for those of you listening at home, make sure to subscribe, leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to join us next week on Spotify Greenroom at 5 p.m. for another Fan Friday. We've got a fantastic staff of writers over at Pounding the Rock who do an amazing job of keeping everyone up to date with silver and black news. So go ahead and check our stuff out. But until next time, guys, take care.